हाँ बात करें।
A very good evening, everyone.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Good evening. Evening should be better with what? Yes. I would love to see you all in cameras. Aliva has made a very kind of suitable background fitting into this evening. No, it was good. Why did you change it? It was good. Yeah, everyone. I hope would have been done with your evening snacks. And today you don't have anything to, as such, you can't claim that you are tired. A free day. Let us have some discussion. I'm not keeping it in terms of giving you lectures and rather we will be make it more fruitful through the level of discussions further, and also taking your point of view in terms of how this 1 hour from now can be productively used, thereby gearing up into the process of your placements as IP as well as your campus, both. Right? So good to go. All of you had your lunch.
Yes, ma'am.
You had your the evening snacks. Yes or no? Anything which you have forgone for having your evening snacks? Nothing. Nothing. Your opportunity cost is 0. So what we plan to take it up forward is a slight degree of again coming back back and forth, what you have studied and making it into a much practical significant of 1 hour. So when we deal with economics as a subject, and it is an enormously broader subject, right? Not fitting into a semester or fitting into a year. So because you are studying the economy itself, and when most of the people think about the subject of economics, do you know what usually when we had our first session, what usually came to your mind when you talked about economics?
Money, ma'am.
Yes. Money,
Scarcity.
scarcity, and what else?
How to listen?
How to?
Ma'am, GDP.
Okay, GDP तो बहुत दूर चले गए. Then your whatness? Bhaskar, I couldn't hear you. Unlimited needs. Okay. So, varied people have varied thoughts when the term economics come to you, right? So, it may be you tell about dealing with scarcity or the basic aspects which you see related to issues of employment or unemployment, government policies changing, taxation, companies merging, going for rise in gasoline prices, stock market fluctuating, international trade. Either there is a more inflows or outflows through which factor income coming in, coming or going out. So what exactly you are delving in? You are taking a far wider view of the area of the study. And when you are asked to define the essence of their subject, then you respond by talking about what you relate to the prices, or you relate to, yes, someone told about GDP or the changes in the interest rate. So instead, what you are trying to do, you are emphasizing that economics is all about viewing the world as a place where they face scarcity and they tend to deal up with certain amount of trade-off. Isn't it? And at the most basic level, nobody has 24 hours more than a day. Does anybody has more than 24 hours in a day? Your limitation is what? Same 24 hours. But how do you make choices about dealing with all your decisions? Having the resources, your resources, you can state about it is, somebody mentioned about money. You can take it as your time. You can take it as your level of energy. You can take it out with your allocation process. So all of you are making a choices, and within the same 24 hours. So when we are offering a particular angle on human choice, forget about other disciplines, what you are tending to do. We tend to emphasize that the people choices are influenced more by the peer groups, the culture, the level of environment. Are these not the factors which is affecting more in terms of realizing your decisions or steering your decisions? Yes or no? Are you all with me or not? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So when you say that you don't disagree with any of that, if you say you are also close, you can very well say that. But you tend to emphasize that choices are also shaped by certain cost benefit analysis. All of you, while coming across any decision alternative, do you go for a cost benefit analysis or not? Be it offered by your peer groups, or it is a culture shock, or it is an environment. All of them will have an effect decisions. For instance, either to take up a particular job which is being offered by company X or company Y. What does you look for? You look into the job description. You look into that whether it is going to fit your area of choice, right? every other. Pratyasha, please keep yourself muted. Pratyasha. Yeah, thank you. So when you are saying that every factor is responsible, yeah, Rashmi, you want to say something?
No, ma'am. By mistake, I unmuted myself.
Okay. So every factor, if I take up in smallest to smallest factor, how do they have its impact in terms of decision making? Everything is backed by a sense of rationality of economics. If the chance of being caught and punished for a crime done, if it is seen that the level of crime falls and is the level of crime rising, is it not that the amount of punishment or the amount of justice which is being imposed, that is a degree and it can have an impact on the rates of the crimes? Or for instance, eBay, I hope everybody would have been aware of eBay. Once time, eBay was also dealing with the market for kidney donation, a kind of situation where kidneys were being sold, unless and until it was creating a huge agitation. So when economics is viewed as analyzing how people make choices under shifting conditions of the cost and benefit, the truth breadth of the subject emerges. And the topic in this course that wouldn't be shocking if any academic economics, they are all topics that are something investigated and later on a person earn Nobel Prize because of the work done, particularly for investigating into all those zones. That means after an overview lecture, you will find that the setting the stage for thinking of economics as rooted is in scarcity, choice, and trade-offs, which we had been discussing from day one of our sessions. And the market-oriented thinking in a number of contexts where it is not familiar, the markets are for procreation, like selling a kidney, or can deal with a decision for predicting future events. So the outcome are all based upon a kind of cost benefit analysis. Because what you are dealing with is you have all dealt with a world of choices having a certain amount of restraint or a constraint. Let me give you another interesting point to you in terms of one scenario. In few of our sessions, we learnt about GDP constant and GDP current prices, right? So let me give you two situations in order to build up the relationship between real GDP, economic growth, and business cycle. Is there any relationship amongst these three? The real GDP, the economic growth, and the business cycle. You learned about all these three terms, and here I'm not going to trigger into all these three terms. Let me give you a situation to further take it ahead. For instance, suppose you have two countries in order to live in. Country X and country Y. I'm not naming any country to just avoid any form of discrimination. So any two countries, X and Y, and you have a choice to live in these two countries. You get an opportunity also to live in these two countries. Let's take in country X, the real GDP grows by 5% each year. Right? And in country Y, the real GDP is the same. For example, let me take, if the real GDP was say $100 billion last year, it is $100 billion current year, and it will be $100 billion the next year. That is what I'm saying, that in country B, the real GDP remains the same, and in country A, the real GDP, it continuously grows by 5%. So given a decision, in which of these countries would you prefer to live? And yes, the condition being other parameters remaining constant, I'm imposing ceteris paribus to this. So now tell me, out of these two countries, you get an opportunity, which country would you choose and why? I hope everyone got my response clearly.
Yes, ma'am.
So can I get a quick glance of your responses? What would be your choice of preference? And yes, I have imposed a condition, ceteris paribus. I hope everybody understand what ceteris paribus now means.
Ma'am, I would choose uh,
Yeah, Ajay. Hello, Ajay. Your voice is, I think, breaking. Anyone? Yes, Ananda was saying something.
Yes, ma'am. I think, ma'am, the first option, which is there is 5% increase every year, is nice because I think it will lead to economic strength and more of a stable economy.
Ma'am, I would prefer the country B, which has a stable, which do not have an economic growth, because as we see, only the developed countries or more developed country has this type of situation where their GDP is constant or rising at a very low pace.
Okay. Anyone else?
Ma'am, I would prefer country X because there is an increase in the real GDP, which means that the economy is growing even though other things are remaining constant. So that is a sign of development rather than a stagnant economy. So for me, country X.
Okay.
So according to me, I will prefer country X because the GDP is constantly growing by 5%, which means the employment rate and the accountability of the employment rate and unemployment rate of that country is decreasing, and the employment rate and other factor in the country is developing gradually by 5%. But in country B, everything is constant. Before 10 years, that is 0%, and till now it is 0%.
Okay. So, any other response? Rest of the class, are you here or not? Very simple state I gave you. You are given an opportunity in both these countries. One country growing at a rate of 5%, it's growing. Another country is remaining the same. That means right now it is at the same figure, 100. Again, in the past it was 100, and in the future it will be 100. So, in which of these countries you will prefer to have your living?
The country is growing by 5% now.
Why do you say that you want to live in a country which is growing by 5%?
Because there is a scope of development. And even if in every year there is a growth. So on that basis, we will have our standard of living will also increase, and based on our choices, we can make good decisions after year by year. So that's the main thing which we can see in this country where it is developing by 5%.
Yeah, Anvesha?
Nothing, ma'am.
So one thing which you might have if you are minutely stated when I give you the situation, I had controlled your condition, isn't it? What was your control condition here?
All other things are constant, madam.
Very good. So that means I have controlled your conditioning, all other things remaining constant. That means I have kept the exogenous factors to be what? Did I allow the exogenous factor to be affecting the model?
No, ma'am.
I didn't allow. So I played very safe. I gave you a kind of scenario which is very much controlled and where there is less chances of instability. Either an economy growing at 5% level, growing each year at 5%, which is growing at a constant rate, that indicates stability, isn't it? Another economy which is remaining the same, that means it was $100 billion economy in the past, $100 billion in the present, and $100 billion in the next. Is it also not a sign of stability?
Yes, madam.
Yes or no? So when you are asked to choose between these two countries, what do you find? Both the economies are stable.
Yes, madam.
Yes or no? Did you get it?
Yes, yes.
Right. Now I am bringing a different set, listen properly, different set to you. Or if you are asked to make a choice between countries like another two countries. So sorry, hello. Please keep yourself muted if you don't want to contribute to this discussion. So in this, the first country, real GDP takes a roller coaster ride. That means alternating between rising and falling. It rises for some months and then falls and then rises and then falls. So that is what I hope everybody have enjoyed a roller coaster ride. And in country 2, the real GDP simply rises year after year. Now tell me, in which of the two countries would you like to live? And yes, ceteris paribus. In this condition, tell me, what will be your choice?
Second country.
Roller coaster, madam.
One country which is a roller coaster, and second country, real GDP simply rises year on year. Which country?
Roller coaster, madam.
Why?
Because I believe that in that country there will be a huge opportunity to grow the technology or the development of that country, but due to the increasing of the GDP, there will be no, actually you don't get any opportunity to diversify your growth, I believe.
Okay.
Ma'am, but if the country will have a greater opportunity, it might also give a very less opportunity, because since it is having a roller coaster kind of GDP, so if it is rising, then the very next moment you cannot you cannot predict that it will continue to rise. It might fall at a very high pace since it is a roller coaster kind of GDP. So I would prefer the second one, where the growth is stagnant and it is continuously rising.
Okay. So in this case, could you mark a difference between two sets of situations given to you? In the first situation, in both cases, it was showing a scenario of stability. While as in the second situation, it was indicating a situation of instability, right? So one was in a rising or a falling phenomenon, second was only in a rising phenomenon. But yes, I have also controlled the factors. The second condition was also ceteris paribus. So all these decisions are to be taken up when we are making up any form of classification pertaining to our understanding on how is the various terms related to your GDP or related to your real GDP. When you come across making any form of decisions, how do in terms of economies grow, these are all a very, very essential part of the components which are going to be taken forward. That is what is the rationality behind decision making. When I started with the very essential part of our discussion, that what does human being understand from economics, it is all delving deeper and deeper into all these factors. So we went back into what we have learned. We have made a reality check of what is going on. We will be bringing on certain issues, certain questions, and we will keep on discussion. So if you remember, yes, can anyone tell me what does this signify? And right now, the situation which I stated, does this answer to your question, this diagram? The first page when I spoke about stability, where would you indicate that? The first two countries which were indicating stability. Stability in the sense that first country growing at the 5% at the constant rate every year, and second country remaining the same. That also indicates stability. So where would you put them here? Yes. Where are you going to put them? All of you remember this? What is this called as?
Ma'am, this is a business cycle.
Exactly, this is a business cycle. What does it indicate?
Ma'am, it shows the ups and downs that an economy faces. For example, there's inflation, there's depression, and if, for example, if an economy goes into depression, then it touches the trough area, then it slowly recovers.
The trough itself is the depression.
Yes,
This is the most lowest part of your either it is you take into human being or it is for an economy.
yes, ma'am.
The trough or the depression is the lowest phase of emotion.
Yes, ma'am.
So,
Ma'am, then slowly it hits the recovery part and then it goes into expansion. Then peak, which we also call as boom. There we experience inflation.
you don't experience inflation. Inflation
we
results
see.
in a boom.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
When an economy is subsequently hit with inflation for a long period of time and it reaches a peak, that creates a problem. We have discussed the case of Zimbabwe and Venezuela, if you remember, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that was the scenarios. So the first two situations which we talk about was showing what almost this straight line which indicate the secular trend of growth. This growth path, what does this growth path indicate? It indicates stability.
Constant. Yes, ma'am.
But what does this cycles indicate? It
There is a-
indicates stability.
There is a fluctuation.
Fluctuation.
is there.
So in my second set of case, where we stated about fluctuations, And whenever fluctuations cause, what are the cause of this fluctuation? It can be anything. The
Yes,
cause can be anything. These are all our exogenous factors, if you remember.
Yes, ma'am.
Something which are the driver of your fluctuation. So that upset the economy from moving in a regular growth trend, which you see as in this straight line. So therefore, when we have spoken about all these factors, we have attributed to certain amount of growth indices or indicators. And here you can find few of these indicators which are functioning, such as I have further broken down those components of GDP, which is, if you remember in our last session, we had focused on C plus I plus G plus X minus M,
Yes, ma'am.
right? So we are taking up the private final consumption expenditure. We will discuss detail in our regular classes. But here I'm trying to build up an establishment with how is that you can relate with any of these factors when economy is being affected. So gross fixed capital expenditure, gross fixed capital formation, change in stocks, valuables, export, import, GDP, and GDP of X government, that is previous government. So most of the estimates, as in India, we follow GVA constant prices. Yeah, can anyone reflect what does that mean? What does GVA or GDP constant prices mean? That means this figure indicates of which year?
Base year.
Very good. Base year.
2011.
Of the base year, right? So we are figuring out this for the base year for the financial year 2021 and financial year 2022. H1, H2, you will see most of the companies, they go for the recording, either it is on the first basis of the first half or the second half of the year. You will see that there has been a change. Either the kind of data are built up annual basis, some are based on quarterly basis, and some data where you will see this H1 FY21 or H2 FY22. This means first half, and first half is from April to September. Second half is October to March. So you can read the data. Hello? Yes, Harsh?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. Ma'am, what is this PE and FAE? What is the full form?
PE and FAE, where did you get it?
I mean the GVA growth, the heading part, financial year 21 bracket in bracket PE,
PE is the estimates, price estimates.
and the FAE part. What is this?
FAE is we are looking into the, again it is a financial accruing year estimate.
Okay, ma'am. And like what are these?
These are specifically the year, the rate at which the financial year growth in terms of agriculture in comparison to the base year. You see this figure. If I look into this price estimates in the agricultural year, in the agriculture sector, which is indicating the GVA, that means value added done in the agriculture sector is 3.6% of the taken out as the base year price. Not,
Yes.
this is not the current year. In industry, you show a negative rate. Mining, negative. Manufacturing, negative. Electricity, 1.9 positive. So this has indicated, this is an indicator of the level of GVA as far as the financial year 2021 of the price estimate. This is the growth estimate.
Ma'am, so when we say that the gross value addition, so when in terms of industry it is negative. So does that mean that industry, the gross value addition
fairly grown, that is neutralizing the sectors which are not performing. In a way, the negativity which has been seen in few of the sectors, that will be offsetted by the positivity in the other sector, as where the total GDP growth remains the same. If you look into that, there are certain negative change, right? But if you look into the total amount more or less remain the same at 7 to 8%. The total, it has not come down.
Yes, ma'am.
So that is how the neutralizing effect of sectors, because when you are computing, we are yet to do with the calculation in our class. I will do, as I mentioned, we are going to do a rigorous calculation of how this estimation is done in across the sectors, across the various components. And how do we arrive at the figure? This is what is the percentage change over the years, right? This is how the percentage change year over year, which has been indicated. If you look into the CPI as well as the WPI, so conceptually, we are going to take up what does this to mean. But in terms of the figure of CPI and WPI, coming to this figure, when this inflation is measured, it has to be measured into two approaches. One being the headline, another is the core. So as we see that, if I look into today's figure, CPI, which is 5.6%. So either it is core or it is headline. If I am saying it is core inflation, that means I am excluding the volatile prices. All those components, all those products which are highly increasing, those set of items are omitted from my basket. So that is what is indicating a core inflation figure. But on the other hand, the headline inflation is something which will take up into factor not only the existing prices, but also those items which are highly volatile in nature. And that is why the country which shows headline inflation, they are continuously prone to the inflationary spikes. That means the inflation rate will be high, the number will be high, of course, isn't it? This figure will show a higher amount or this figure will show a higher amount out of these two?
Headline inflation.
Certainly, headline inflation is definitely going to take up a higher level rather than that of the other one. So whenever you are looking into any company's record, as far as to find out either in that sector, to what extent has the price has increased and are they contributing to the inflation while the level of inflation is being computed, that of course has to be taken up that either the computation is done on the basis of the core or the headline, because these two differentiates usually are skipped out when the economy shows the level of calculation in terms of indexing CPI and WPI. We are happy with 5.5 figures, but we are negating the factor that we have completely taken out the items of our highly volatile items. So in this case, we will go into the calculation of CPI in our regular classes. So this contains certain basket of goods as well as services which are taken up into the computation, and there is a definite method of computation. So as in WPI, where we provide certain weights to manufacturing, primary articles, and fuel. And WPI components are completely different than that of your CPI, because in CPI, we are looking at from the consumer point of view. We are computing the cost of living index. Whereas in WPI, we are not looking into that. So the next point of stating you this, any kind of fluctuation which you see in terms of the business cycle, those fluctuation can be tackled by whom? Who are the players in terms of controlling this kind of fluctuation?
Government.
Governments,
Exactly. So government, but government, how does it do?
Tax imposition, tariff barriers,
policies,
policies,
Okay. And
Interest rate.
interest rates. Okay. So have you seen government? Sometimes government do certain things deliberately, knowingly. Knowingly, they will cut down spending. Knowingly, they will raise the level of tax rates. Knowingly, they will print notes they will start printing more notes. They will pull in investment activities. So some activities are done deliberately when it is required, whereas certain activities are done voluntarily in terms of the activities. So all this thing fits into this policy of fiscal mechanism, where you deal with the government exchequer and you deal with the level of the changes either in the tax structure or in their expenditure or in terms of increasing borrowings or in terms of taking up the decision with respect to note printing. If you remember, during demonetization, there was no other alternative in the hand of the government rather than to come up with the policy of remonetization. Remonetization in that they started printing more and more notes because certain currencies were out from the market. The market needed cash. So cash was deliberately flooded into the system through the process of remonetization. So looking into the situation, the government tends to use its tools, actions, either in the form of fiscal policy or in the form of monetary policy in order to tame this business cycle. So why we call it as the business cycle? Because it is a cyclical scenario. It does not remain constant. If you would have seen the kind of trend pattern of your COVID, I usually call it to be cyclical. Do you know why? Yes or no? Is it cyclical?
yes, ma'am.
You see from the month of January 1st, if you would have noticed the trend, December, closing December, January, February, it will be at its peak. Then from March onwards, it will come down. Is it not a cyclical kind of scenario?
Yes, ma'am.
So something which forms a cycle and it forms a pattern into this, that means it is existing into a nature and the policies has to change according to that. There are different ways in which economic move. One of them is cyclical, which you see. Others are structural. Some are due to frictional, right? You see a lot about the Great Resignation. You heard about Great Resignation of the economy, where a lot of mass scale resignation took up. So it can be due to frictional, isn't it? There are frictional scenarios, reasons. which creates a friction. Or those who are studying, you have studied what does friction mean. So all those changes, those upturns or downturns in terms of its cyclical phenomenon, all are resorting to a scenario of policies. That means whenever economy is down, you tend to call for a policy of pushing the economy, and you tend to go for an expansionary policies. Like which you notice perhaps during the past few years, economy worldwide, they had gone for a expansionary policy, maybe in terms of monetary or fiscal. Expansionary means they did all those activities which will boost up the economy back to beyond the level of growth trend. Like they reduced.
LPG
Yes.
reform.
Sorry, Vishwajit.
LPG reform.
Okay. And what else? What else policies change? Do you notice economy wide, worldwide?
Ma'am, demonetization.
Demonetization. I am talking about particularly during this demonetization was long back in 2016. I'm talking about particularly during these 2 years. What change do you notice into the practice of the economy worldwide? They have gone for a lenient policy or dovish policy. Like what kind of easiness in their policies do you notice, both at government as well as bank level?
Reducing the taxes.
Ma'am, they have printed more money.
They have printed more money. Okay. Yes.
Digital means they are mostly into digital in a digital what we say.
See, all these things are the outcome which you are mentioning me.
I'm
But
decreasing the
I am
interest rate.
asking about what were the various strategies which were used.
Decreasing the interest rate. So that
Exactly. To boost the investment, to whatever Harsh mentioned, that is an outcome. So, but what exactly was done to reach this outcome, to get this outcome? You find a reduction, heavy reduction. Many countries had gone for a negative repos, negative interest rates. Why? Did they feel good and running in at a negative interest rates? But why did they go for? Why did they resort for such practices?
increase
Because
the
of
growth.
pandemic.
Can infuse the money in the country.
Boost the economy.
Exactly. So you find interest rates coming down, CRR rates coming down, SLR rates coming down. There was more infusion of government spendings, which has escalated the level of fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit हमारा जो 9.5% हो गया, that is of GDP. If I say that my GDP is closer to $3.1 trillion, that means 9.5% of 3.1, that amount of money I am borrowing from another country to take out to mitigate my deficit. So all these things are a kind of easing monetary policy or easing fiscal policy to not to push the economy into which stage, inflation or recession. All these things were done not to push the economy into
Recession.
recession. Everybody expected that India would go back to recession, isn't it? But did it happen?
No, ma'am.
Because we thought that we being a reasonably growing economy, and this pandemic would utterly push us back into a scenario of recession. But that didn't happen. And why did that happen? due to the changes in the way the structure of the policies in which the government as well as the country at an individual level, which is of course an entity of the macroeconomic level, works. Right? So if the economy needs to be slowed, enacted policies are referred to be contractionary, just the opposite. But if the economy needs to be stimulated, then the policy prescription is expansionary. So for that, we use monetary policy to facilitate consistent economic growth, while the use of government is through fiscal policy. And government policy measures which are fiscal, they can be either contractionary or expansionary in nature, depending upon the mechanism. So therefore, both these processes in terms of the tools are highly, highly essential in order to put the economy back into the growth trajectories. So I show you a well-defined growing at that trend. It is very much required. Every country want to grow, but at a trend, at a particular trend in terms of a steady path, not to have peaks and in terms of erratic ECGs, as you see, which is neither good for human being health. Similarly, erratic ECGs in an economy is not good for economic survival for a long period of time. So that is why the essentiality of economies are really, really required in terms of the various policy mechanism which you tend to see. We started with a kind of scenario with economic disorders, and we move across certain indicators of causing for this economic indicators, and then we settle with few of these decision alternatives, giving a certain solution so that how one can emerge out of such extreme zones. Right? So we are going to discuss in detail in our next session about how does it work in terms of its calculation, as we have started just in terms of 5 sessions in terms of macro. So very preliminary computation are yet to be done. So once we proceed further, I think that will provide more clarity in terms of how the calculations are done. But this particular 1 hour session was to make you brief about the various usage of this concept which are generally being asked by the placement team. Given a situation, having a particular knowledge on all this concept, how do you establish and how do you come to a solution? Right? Because it is only as you study it, is it through a market only, and market create opportunities, and market also derails the opportunity. Yes, we are open for questions now. Next few minutes.
Hello.
Yes, Vishwajit.
Yeah. Madam, the trade deficit of India is more than $100 billion in 2021. And it indicates somehow
$100 billion. That means if you compute it in terms of the GDP, that is how much percentage of GDP? You have to figure it. So either it is when you talk about trade deficit, so trade deficit is essentially a current account deficit. We'll talk about it in our future classes. That means all those transactions which are carried out in the basket of exports and imports, both visibles as invisibles. Visibles means goods, Invisibles mean services.
Services.
So if you find a difference, taking into account the transfer payments also. So transfer payments, if you remember in one of where we're talking about all those unilateral transfers, like your gifts, your indemnities, your scholarships, pension, in terms of the grants, aid, these are all what? One-sided. So again, in calculation of your trade deficit, if you find all these factors in terms of income going out, that will result in a deficit in the current account. So $100 billion means that is what extent of GDP? Because before 2020-21, our current account deficit was 3.1% of GDP. It was really at a very high side. Now it has come down. It is still deficit. I'm not ignoring the fact that it has become a surplus. It is still deficit because it will take time to come to a surplus side. The major reason is our importing of crude oil. More than 70% of our import basket comprises of crude oil only, and that you cannot omit unless and until you have your own production resources of crude oil. So that figure, you need to check out that it is what percent of GDP. I'm certainly sure it is around 1% of GDP. Right?
0.2, I believe.
Yes. So in that sense, that will signify that what is the exact rate of trade deficit which has taken up as far as the competition. So yes. Yeah, any more questions? Hello? Everyone, are you here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Sab answers sabhi ke samay where is your response it not coming? So I have shared if you all of I think you might have received. There are certain FAQs as well as in order to understand the concepts A to Z of economics, it has been shared. So usually in placement, some apart from situational based questions, certain conceptual based questions are being asked. So I would request all of you to go through that because in a very detailed scale, all those terms has been delineated with proper examples. But yes, your side of the activity which you have to do is you need to go through. It is just a dictionary of all economic terms. If you want to refer, that can be referred from the file which has been shared. Okay? And in the Google Drive also, I am sharing few questions. So consecutively as we move on, certain question will be populated over there. And you can also write down your questions over there. And from time to time, all those questions can be answered. Okay?
Yes,
Yes.
The question,
Yes, Prerna?
ma'am, why don't we take into consideration headline inflation? Why do we always look at core inflation?
See, that is the reason as to when you take headline inflation and it is prices are highly fluctuating in nature, it gives an inflationary pressure to your economy. So
And the
none of
headline
the,
inflation is equally important, no? So, ma'am,
it is
Right.
actually important as we state about real GDP, no? Nobody
Yes, ma'am.
talks about real GDP.
We talk about nominal
You
GDP.
talk about nominal GDP, right? So something what in economics there is two content. One is a positive, another is a normative. Positive is what is the fact. Normative is what should be, right? So yes, if it is should be, it should be real GDP. That is why when I started, I gave you with the situation of real GDP because that is a real factor where you are discounting the rates, you are including the changes in fluctuation of inflation or deflation. That is real. But in nominal, you don't know either it is inflation or deflation, no? Because you are at the present state. Nominal is always the present state. You will say that today the prices of onion are so and so. But if you don't have a benchmark to compare with, can you know that to what extent the onion prices have increased or decreased?
No, ma'am.
No. So if you live at the nominal rate, you will say that, okay, there is no change. Economies should follow at the real rate. They should be speaking about real GDP. But do we? Very often we take up nominal. Similarly, we should be taking headline inflation. That is my statement of when stating you that why we had created distinction between these two. It should be headline inflation. But actually, if you look into it, is taken as core inflation because none of the economies want to have the jerk of an inflationary pressure. Right? So that is why usually core inflation is taken as like your nominal rates.
Got it, ma'am. Thank you.
So if there is any question in the subsequent sessions as we proceed, I will go over with few more all things and we'll try to integrate with how do the companies they look for responses where catering to all those concepts and how you can integrate that with any other. There is a trick if you don't know subsequent technical question, how you can take the questions to your areas of strength. So that can be also learned in this process. Okay.
Ma'am, that Google Drive link, it is asking for request. Request access.
Okay, I will give you the request.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
So